I never thought infidelity would look like silence. Not the kind that comes from anger or distance, but the kind that hums in the background, subtle and constant, like a machine you forget is running until it stops. That's what my marriage had become, quiet in all the wrong ways. My name, Aaron. I'm 32, live in Chicago, and for most of my adult life I've been someone's girlfriend, someone's wife, someone's other half. I used to think that was romantic, that being someone meant you were loved. But now I see it for what it was, a way of disappearing while smiling. When I met Nate, I was 24 and working as a junior copywriter for a digital marketing firm downtown. He was 2 years older, tall, good with people in a way that felt natural, effortless. Everyone liked him, the kind of guy who could make a barista laugh while ordering coffee or turn an awkward silence in a meeting into something easy. I remember thinking, he's safe. Not boring exactly, but stable. The kind of man who'd never leave without saying goodbye. For the first few years, it was good. We laughed, we built a life. We shared playlists, Sunday morning bagels, stupid fights about laundry. He proposed to me in a park, the same one we used to walk through after long work days, and I said yes without hesitation because it felt like the next natural step. I wasn't thinking about forever, not really. Just about how nice it would be to stop searching. We got married in 2019, right before everything in the world started falling apart. The photos from that day make us look like the kind of couple that everyone else envies, all smiles and soft light and promises we didn't understand yet. But then came the slow drift, the pandemic, the endless sameness, Nate working late at home, me trying to stay busy, the sound of his voice on Zoom calls bleeding into the walls. I remember noticing how often he smiled when talking to one of his coworkers, Julia. I'd hear her laugh through his laptop speakers, that bright, musical sound that filled the whole room. I told myself not to be paranoid. Everyone was isolated. We were all reaching for connection. Still, the small things started stacking up. He became careful with his phone, tilting the screen away when I walked by. He started going on runs after work that lasted longer than they should have. One night I asked, "Are you okay?" And he smiled in that practiced, reassuring way that men do when they don't want to talk. "Yeah, just tired," he said, and I wanted to believe him. The night I found out, it wasn't through texts or lipstick or anything cinematic. It was an email, a notification that flashed on our shared iPad when he left it charging by the bed. The subject line said, "Last night was a mistake." I clicked it before I could stop myself. The message was short, clinical even. "I can't do this again. You have a wife, Nate. I can't be that person." My heart didn't break. It sank, like a body thrown into deep water, heavy and still. He was in the shower when I read it. I remember staring at the screen, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. When he came out, wrapped in a towel, humming some song under his breath, I asked, quietly, like a question I already knew the answer to, "Who's Julia?" He froze, not long, just a second, but long enough. After that, things blurred. There were tears, shouting, the sound of glass breaking. He said it was one time, that he'd been lonely, that he didn't know how to talk to me anymore. I wanted to scream that he could have tried, that I was right there every night waiting for him to look up from his phone and see me. He moved out the next day, said he needed space. I didn't ask where he went, but I knew. For weeks, I walked through the apartment like a ghost. The air smelled like him, like coffee and cedar and something faintly metallic. I couldn't bring myself to change the sheets or throw out his toothbrush. Grief is strange that way. It turns ordinary things into altars. Friends told me to focus on myself, to move on, to not let him win. But they didn't understand that infidelity isn't just betrayal, it's erasure. It makes you question every memory, every shared joke, every moment you thought meant something. One night, when I couldn't sleep, I opened Reddit and started reading posts from women who'd gone through the same thing. Pages and pages of heartbreak, confusion, fury, numbness. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. That's why I'm writing this now, because sometimes telling the story is the only way to survive it. I remember the first time I tried to sleep in the bed alone. It was 2 weeks after Nate moved out. I'd been avoiding it, falling asleep on the couch most nights with the TV playing reruns until the noise blurred into dreams. That night, I made myself climb under the covers because it felt pathetic, still orbiting the shadow of him. The sheets were cold, smelled faintly of detergent and him. I stared at the ceiling for hours. At some point, I started crying, not because I missed him, at least not exactly, but because everything I'd built my life around had vanished without warning. People tell you betrayal feels like anger, but for me, it was quiet. It was like walking through the apartment and realizing all the light bulbs had burned out. In the mornings, I'd make coffee just to have something warm in my hands. I started taking long walks through the city after work, tracing routes I'd never bothered to explore when we were together. I'd walk past couples in restaurant windows and imagine their stories. Were they happy? Would they end like us? Sometimes, I envied their innocence, the way they looked at each other like the future was still solid ground. I started seeing a therapist after my sister gently insisted. Her name was Fiona. She had a calm, slow way of speaking that made me feel safe enough to unravel. The first few sessions, I just talked about him, how he'd been funny, charming, thoughtful until he was. How I'd replayed every moment, trying to find the instant where things shifted. She said something I still think about. You don't have to find the exact moment it broke. You just have to stop living inside the version of yourself that was still trying to fix it. That stayed with me. By late spring, I'd started piecing together a new rhythm. I joined a yoga class, deleted his number, changed my hair, moved the furniture around. It sounds small, but it mattered. Every act of rearranging felt like proof I could still decide something. Then came Liam. I met him through work. He was a graphic designer who occasionally collaborated with our team. The first time we talked was over a Zoom call about a client project, and he made some dumb joke about corporate slogans sounding like breakup lines. We're restructuring is just, it's not you, it's me, but for business. I laughed. Really laughed, for the first time in months. A few weeks later, we met in person for a meeting, and he was even funnier in real life, slightly disheveled, a little nervous, the kind of guy who overthinks his own jokes but somehow pulls it off. There was something easy about him. I didn't feel like I was performing, the way I always had with Nate. We started getting lunch together once in a while, then drinks after work. He didn't push, he just listened. When I told him I'd gone through a rough breakup, he didn't ask for details. He just said, "Yeah, I get it," and changed the subject to something light. I think that's what drew me in. He didn't try to fix me. I told myself I wasn't ready for anything serious, that I just wanted to feel something other than grief. But feelings don't care about timing. They sneak up on you in the way someone's hand lingers on your shoulder, or how they remember your coffee order. By the time summer arrived, Liam and I were spending weekends together. He lived in a tiny apartment with plants crowding every windowsill and a cat named Olive who hated everyone but him. The first night I stayed over, we lay awake talking about everything: family, regrets, favorite songs. I hadn't talked like that in years. When he kissed me, it wasn't fireworks. It was gentleness, safety. But even in the quiet happiness, there were cracks. Sometimes he'd text late and take a while to reply. My heart would spike instantly. I'd imagine another woman, a secret, a hidden thread unspooling just like before. I'd tell myself not to be paranoid, that Liam was Nate. Still, the fear sat in my chest like a stone. Once, after a week of him seeming distant, I asked if everything was okay. He looked surprised. "Yeah, of course. Why?" "I don't know," I said. "You just seem elsewhere." He reached for my hand. "I'm not, you just have to trust that." Trust, such a small word, such a heavy lift. It wasn't fair, I knew. He hadn't done anything wrong. But when you've been betrayed once, even kindness feels dangerous. I'd wake up some nights convinced it would all vanish, that he'd leave, that I'd check his phone and find proof that love always ends the same way. I never did, but the fear was enough to make me cautious, reserved. We lasted almost a year. We were good, mostly, until we were. It started when his company offered him a position in Portland. He said it was temporary, just a few months. I said we could handle it, but distance tests everything. The calls grew shorter, the texts slower. When he came back to visit, something between us had shifted. He was quieter, distracted. One night, sitting across from him at dinner, I saw the same expression Nate used to have, present but not really there. It made me nauseous. So I asked softly, "Is there someone else?" He flinched. That was all I needed to know. He told me the truth later that week. There, been someone on his team. It just happened. The same words I'd heard before, the same hollow explanation. I remember laughing, really laughing, but not the good kind. The bitter kind that tastes like metal. When he left, I didn't cry. I didn't break anything. I just cleaned the kitchen, wiped down the counters, and threw away the flowers he'd brought the week before. Then I sat on the floor and stared at my reflection in the oven door. 2 men, 2 betrayals, one pattern I couldn't unsee. It wasn't them I hated. It was the way I kept choosing men who needed me to make them feel good, to make them feel enough. I'd built my life around being someone's proof of worth. And when they didn't need that anymore, they left. For weeks after, I walked through the city trying to feel alive again. One night, I ended up at the lake. The skyline glowed against the dark water, reflections trembling on the surface. I thought about how many versions of me had stood here, the hopeful girl, the broken wife, the woman trying again. I sat on a bench until the sun came up. When I finally went home, I opened my laptop and started writing. Not for anyone else, just for me. About what it feels like to be left. About what it means to stay anyway. And somewhere between the words, I realized I wasn't writing about them anymore. I was writing about myself, about how maybe heartbreak wasn't proof of failure, but of being alive enough to keep risking it. When I started writing, it was just a way to empty out the noise in my head. I didn't think it would become something I depended on. But soon, I found myself writing every day, mornings before work, evenings after dinner, scribbling in my phone while waiting for the train. It wasn't neat or poetic. It was raw, sometimes ugly. Some entries were only a few sentences long, like a whisper I didn't want anyone else to hear. I still wake up expecting him beside me. I hate that I still check my phone. I'm afraid I'll never trust anyone again. Over time, the words started changing. I stopped writing about them. The men, the betrayals, the endless apologies that came too late. I started writing about me. About the way sunlight hit my kitchen counter in the morning, the way my neighbor's dog barked every time the mail came, the way I felt when I caught my own reflection and didn't flinch. Healing doesn't happen like a movie montage. It's slow, repetitive, and so boring sometimes you think you're not making progress. But you are. A few months after Liam left, my friend Camilla convinced me to go on a weekend trip with her and her boyfriend. They invited a few others, a mix of friends and friends of friends. I almost said no. The thought of being around couples felt like pressing on a bruise, but she didn't let up. "You need air, Aaron," she said. "Real air, not Chicago exhaust." So I went. We rented a cabin near Lake Geneva. It was early fall, the air sharp and clean, the trees bleeding into color. The first night, everyone sat around a bonfire drinking wine and telling stories. I listened more than I spoke, the flames reflecting in their faces, their laughter echoing into the dark. It felt distant and close at the same time, like watching a version of life I'd forgotten how to join. There was one guy there named Daniel. He wasn't particularly loud or charming, but there was something about him, an ease in how he existed. He didn't try to fill the silence, didn't ask invasive questions, didn't look at me like I was something broken to understand. He just was. Later that night, when everyone had gone inside, I stayed out by the fire, staring into the embers. He came back out, wrapped in a blanket, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "You looked cold," he said. We talked for a while. About nothing, really. Music, work, the weird way time moves after your life falls apart. I told him about the city, how I loved it and hated it in equal measure. He told me he'd grown up in a small town in Michigan and came to Chicago for a fresh start. There was something comforting about how unremarkable it all was. He didn't flirt. He didn't ask for my number that night. When we all said goodbye 2 days later, he just smiled and said, "Take care, Aaron." It was months before I saw him again. We ran into each other at a bookstore downtown. I was in the aisle flipping through a collection of essays, and he appeared beside me like a quiet memory. "You're the girl who doesn't like small towns," he said. I laughed before I could help it. We got coffee afterward. It wasn't love, not at first. It wasn't even a spark. It was ease, a steady warmth instead of a fire. We started seeing each other casually, dinners, walks, long conversations that stretched into early mornings. I told him about Nate and Liam, about the mess I'd been, about how I wasn't sure I knew how to trust. He didn't offer solutions. He just said, "Then let's not rush." That patience scared me more than anything. I wasn't used to being given space without the expectation to fill it. There was a moment one night, winter again, when I realized I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. We were sitting on my couch watching some terrible documentary, his head on my shoulder, and I felt something strange, quiet happiness, not excitement, not obsession, just peace. But peace can be fragile. One morning, while I was at his place, he got a call. He stepped outside to take it, which wasn't unusual. But when he came back, he seemed off. I asked if everything was okay, and he said, "Yeah, just work stuff." But the hesitation was there, faint but familiar. A few days later, I saw a notification flash on his phone while he was in the shower. A text from a woman named Marissa. "Last night was amazing." I froze. The same sinking feeling, the same taste of metal in my mouth. I didn't open it. I didn't confront him right then. I just sat there on the edge of the bed, staring at the message, my hands shaking. When he came out, I looked at him and said quietly, "Who's Marissa?" He blinked, confused at first. Then I saw the realization dawn. His face changed shock, then guilt, then shame. "It's not what you think," he started, the same useless sentence every man seems to be born knowing. But I didn't want to hear it. I got dressed, picked up my bag, and left. He called, texted, tried to explain, said it had been a friend, said it was innocent, said he didn't want to lose me. But I didn't answer, I couldn't. Because even if it was nothing, even if he hadn't crossed the line yet, the fact that I couldn't tell the difference meant something was already broken. That night, I walked the city until my legs ached. The cold cut through my coat, the air sharp and punishing. I thought about how cruelly circular it all was, how I'd promised myself I wouldn't end up here again, how careful I'd been, how none of it had saved me. At one point, I stopped on a bridge and leaned over the railing, watching the river shimmer with the reflection of streetlights. The water kept moving, steady and indifferent. I wondered if that's what healing really looked like, not forgetting, not forgiving, just continuing. I didn't cry this time. I was too tired, too aware. When I got home, I took off my coat, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat in silence. The apartment felt both empty and full. Empty of them, full of me. And for the first time, I realized maybe that was enough. It took me a long time to stop trying to rewrite the story in my head. For months, I kept circling back to every conversation, every text, every silence. Like if I could just find the exact moment things went wrong, I could fix it. But the truth is, I've spent most of my adult life trying to make broken things work. Relationships, people, versions of myself that never really fit. And maybe part of growing up isn't finding the right person. It's finally realizing that some things aren't meant to be repaired. After Daniel, I didn't date for a while. I didn't swear off love dramatically or make some grand declaration about being done with men. I just stopped. I deleted the apps, muted the mutual friends, and focused on small, almost stupid things. Cooking for myself, taking long walks without checking my phone, reading before bed instead of scrolling through people's highlight reels. It felt strange at first, lonely even, but there was also a quiet sense of relief in not performing for anyone. No more pretending to be easygoing when I wasn't, no more minimizing my needs to seem chill, no more apologizing for expecting honesty. For once, the silence was mine. My friends started noticing the change. Camilla told me one night over wine, "You look lighter, not happier exactly, but freer." And she was right. I wasn't happy all the time. Healing isn't that neat. Some mornings I woke up with that old ache in my chest, the one that whispered, "You're unlovable, that's why they leave." But I learned to talk back to it, to remind myself that people's choices aren't proof of my worth. That leaving isn't always loss. It can be an act of self-preservation. I started therapy again. For real this time, not the half-hearted kind where you say you're fine until the hour runs out. My therapist asked me once what I was most afraid of. Without thinking, I said, "Being too much." She smiled gently and said, Maybe the right person won't think so. That stuck with me. A few months later, I ran into Daniel again. It was at a farmer's market in late spring, the air thick with the smell of strawberries and rain. He looked the same, maybe a little older, maybe a little sadder. He saw me before I saw him, and when our eyes met, we both froze. Then he smiled, hesitant, polite, and I smiled back. He walked over and we talked for a while. It wasn't awkward, but it wasn't warm either. There was this quiet mutual understanding between us. We'd meant something to each other, but it had run its course. I didn't ask about Marissa. He didn't offer explanations. It didn't matter anymore. When we said goodbye, he touched my arm lightly and said, "You look good, Aaron." And for the first time, I didn't need that validation. I just smiled and said, "Yeah, I am." After that, I kept walking through the market, buying peaches, talking to vendors, laughing with strangers. The sky broke open with a quick summer rain, and I didn't rush for cover. I let it soak me. My hair, my clothes, my skin. I stood there, laughing like someone who had finally stopped running from the storm. That night, I went home and opened my laptop. Not to write about him or any of them, but about me. I wrote about the girl who kept loving until it broke her, and how she finally learned that love doesn't have to mean losing yourself. I wrote about the woman who forgave herself for staying too long, for hopping too hard, for believing that love could fix what self-respect should have protected. And then, when I was done, I wrote this. I'm still learning, still scared sometimes. But I'm not waiting anymore. Not to be chosen, not to be understood, not to be enough. I already am. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and stood by the window, watching the city glitter beneath me. Cars moved like veins of light, people weaving their lives through each other, all of us trying, failing, starting again. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who waited by the phone, who made excuses for people who couldn't love her right, who believed that pain was proof of passion. I wanted to tell her she'd make it here someday, that she'd find herself on the other side of heartbreak, not untouched, but unbroken. The truth is, love still scares me. The vulnerability of it, the uncertainty. But I don't hate that anymore. Because it means I'm still capable of feeling deeply, of risking, of being human. Sometimes I catch myself imagining the future. Not the way I used to, with someone else completing the picture, but just me. Maybe I'll fall in love again. Maybe I won't. Either way, I'll be okay. Because for the first time in my life, I'm not chasing love. I'm choosing peace. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of self. When I finally went to bed that night, I didn't dream about anyone else. Just light, water, and the quiet rhythm of my own breathing, steady, unafraid, alive.